On Monday, President Trump's legal team will finally get to present the president's affirmative defense. Here's what I would argue. For 24 hours, House managers devoted hour upon hour to proving two factual propositions. Number one, that the president temporarily delayed military aid to Ukraine. And number two, that President Trump sought an investigation into Burisma, the Ukrainian natural gas company, and a corruption potentially involving Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden. On those 2 points, they devoted more than half of their argument, arguing ad nauseum with site after site and clip after clip. Both of those points are undisputed. Both of those points, everyone admits. There is no dispute that the military aid was delayed, and there is no dispute that the president sought an investigation into Burisma. Indeed, he has said so on national television multiple times. Neither of those factual propositions are impeachable offenses. In fact, neither of those propositions are remotely contrary to law. Presidents have the authority and regularly have temporarily delayed foreign aid in circumstances where they had concerns. And when it comes to investigating corruption, a president has the authority and the responsibility to investigate serious claims of corruption. During their 24-hour opening argument, the Democrats built their case on the proposition that it was utterly fraudulent, that it was completely baseless, that there was no evidence to seek an investigation into Burisma and corruption. That proposition is laughable, because not only was there sufficient evidence to seek an investigation into Burisma and corruption, there was so much evidence that there was a need, a legitimate need to investigate, and that need remains today. That corruption or potential corruption still needs to be investigated today. And from there, the Trump lawyers should calmly, coolly, systematically walk through the mountains of evidence that raise major red flags, that raise major concerns about corruption, about the sitting vice president bragging about blocking $1 billion in aid to Ukraine until they fire the prosecutor who is investigating the company Burisma that is paying his own son $1 million a year. The White House team should calmly, systematically prosecute that case.
That's a pretty good argument. This is Verdict with Ted Cruz. Welcome back to the show. I'm Michael Knowles. And before we get into those arguments, because this is a very pivotal day, the Democrats have finally stopped talking, hallelujah, and the Trump team gets to make its defense. Before we get into that, I have got to thank the listeners for engaging with this show, subscribing, leaving 5-star reviews, and actually bringing this show all the way up to number 1 on the charts, the number 1 podcast in the country. It is incredible. Congratulations, Senator.
Well, congratulations to you. And I got to say to all the listeners, it is a testament. Look, I think there are a lot of folks in this country who care about substance and issues. And so much of what you get on TV, so much of what you get of talking heads is just people yelling at each other and doing sound bites. And I think people are interested in really trying to understand an issue, knowing facts, knowing con law. Look, as you know, Michael, we've talked with our team putting this together, and occasionally there's some discussion of, well, maybe we ought to dumb things down and then not actually get into complicated things. But look, I think people are interested in understanding. They don't have 1 million hours to dive in and drown in it, but they're interested in understanding issues. And I hope that this show, now and going forward, helps people really understand an issue and what's behind it and what you need to know what's going on.
Of course, people are so much smarter than they get credit for. And I think people are interested, and no one's going to watch 20 hours a day of these extremely tedious impeachment trials, but you've broken it down well. And that the argument you just made is pretty interesting, because basically what you're saying is, yes, on the basic facts that the Democrats laid out, we all agree. It's not impeachable whatsoever. At the heart of this impeachment investigation is this potential corruption in Ukraine with the Bidens, and then the Trump team should just talk about that. The big Trump argument is going to really begin on Monday in prime time when maybe some people are paying attention. But today you had a little, 2-hour session.
Today we had about 2 hours.
The Trump team tees up their arguments. You've come straight from the Capitol, straight from the impeachment trial. What's your reaction?
Look, I think for the 2 hours, they did a good job of refuting some of the points that the House managers made, and pointing out in particular all the things they left out. So they did an effective job of saying they showed you this clip from witness 1, 2, or 3, but what they didn't show you is what they said next. And there were lots of good examples where they'd go to the video, and I think you could see senators kind of nodding. I think that's what the Trump lawyers did most effectively today, is say, well, gosh, why didn't the House managers tell you that? And they pointed that out quite a bit. I think that was helpful for undermining confidence in the whole body of what the House managers presented over the last 3 days.
So I couldn't see senators nodding because I was not there, but you saw that. I guess because it's so pivotal today, because now the Democrat case is over, the Trump case begins. If the Trump lawyers are saying, here's what the Democrats told you, but here's what they left out, what you're saying is that the Democrat arguments were deceptive.
Yes. They were deceptive using lots of different tools. All right, here's a particular logical construct that the House managers used to be deceptive. They used this several times. And it's a logical construct of X, not Y. So, for example, let me explain what that means. They say, for example, that President Trump and Republicans bought the narrative that Ukraine and not Russia interfered in the 2016 election. Now, in that model, X is right. Ukraine did interfere in 2016. The lie, the deception, is the not Y. So when they say Ukraine, not Russia, look, it is obvious Russia tried to interfere in 2016, did interfere in 2016, invested real money, had a team of people pushing out fraudulent material online. That happened. That was real. And anyone who looks at the evidence recognizes that. But the fact that Russia did doesn't mean no other country did. So the way they frame it, and you'll see they do this all the time, they say they push the fraudulent theory that Ukraine and not Russia interfered. Here's another way they do it.
So because it's true that the Republicans are saying Ukraine interfered, but it's not true that Republicans are also saying, therefore, Russia did not interfere.
And it would be false. If we said Russia did not interfere, that's a false statement.
Right.
Russia did interfere, but they're using that construct to deceive you. I'll give you another example they've used about President Trump wanting an investigation into Biden and into Burisma. What the House managers said over and over and over again is the president wanted the announcement of an investigation and not an actual investigation. X and not Y. So there's lots of evidence Trump wanted an investigation announced.
Right.
There is zero evidence that Trump didn't want an actual investigation. And the House managers asserted over and over and over again an announcement and not an actual investigation. They've never cited any evidence whatsoever. And by the way, think about it. In what universe would Trump not want an investigation?
Right.
I mean, he's calling for investigate this. This is corrupt. It stinks. Investigate it. And the hook that they use is they have one witness's testimony that Trump wanted to put the president of Ukraine in a, quote, public box. And they say, aha, that proves all he cared about was the announcement. It was just political for domestic consumption. Public box. We prove he wanted an announcement and not an actual investigation. Well, what utter nonsense. Why else might you want to put Zelensky in a public box, the president of Ukraine? Maybe because Ukraine has had a long history of corruption. They've been unwilling to go after Burisma. They've been afraid to do it. I'll tell you, you do it all the time. If someone is reluctant to do something, one of the best ways to get them to do it is I don't want you just to secretly commit to me, wink, wink, nudge, nudge,
you've
I'll
got to be on
secretly
the
do
record.
it. Stand up and say you'll do it publicly because the chances of your following through are much higher.
So the Democrats' trick here is that they're making a true statement and they're using the true statement to cover up for the false statement that they say immediately afterward.
So if you, yes, and if you hear the Democrats, the media does this all the time. The media loves doing the you're saying Ukraine and not Russia interfered. No, that's not what we're saying.
Right.
That logical construct, X and not Y, is a real giveaway that they're engaging in lawyerly sleight of hand.
That is, I would not have picked up on that. Obviously, I've been hearing it. Like you use the example that President Trump wanted the announcement of an investigation into the Bidens, but he didn't want an actual investigation. And
does that make any sense?
If you think about it for 5 seconds, it makes no sense.
Picture that from the other side. So imagine someone saying, Democrats wanted the announcement of the Mueller investigation, but they didn't actually want the Mueller investigation to happen. Are you friggin' nuts? It's
they want the announcement and the investigation.
It's a ludicrous proposition. And yet they say it. And by the way, Adam Schiff says it very smoothly. He says it smiling. And to date, I haven't seen anyone actually contradicting it and pointing out that half of that sentence is
crazy.
Total deception.
Right. That's an incredibly deceptive trick. And it's so deceptive that even I've been paying close attention to this.
There's a reason lawyers are so beloved.
The most popular people in the country. Well, speaking of the most popular people in the country, I want to pivot a little bit here because you've now had this impeachment trial go on and on and on. In the 2020 election, we're now 9 days out from the Iowa caucuses, right? This is the first big event of the presidential primary campaign. But you've got 3 Democratic senators who are stuck in Washington, D.C. in the impeachment trial running for president.
Well, and it's driving them bat crap crazy. Although actually, technically, I have to correct you. Technically, we have 4 Democratic senators.
Well, there's Bernie, there's Warren, and there's Amy Klobuchar.
And nobody remembers Michael Bennet from Colorado is also still theoretically running.
Is he?
As far as I know, he's in the race. The only reason I pointed out is he launched his campaign. Literally, the whole basis for his campaign is a few months ago he stood on the Senate floor and screamed at me. And his launch campaign email, like what he talked about in the email launching his presidential campaign, is I yelled at Ted Cruz on the Senate floor. And I got to say, I'm actually kind of a little offended that apparently yelling at me is not even worth a percent point in the Democratic primary for president.
I have to say, this is a little embarrassing for me that I did not know that he was still running. It is more embarrassing for him, but I digress.
Look, all of them are losing their minds not to be there. I mean, it was, you can see them, like during the trial, there'd be periods where each of them would be up in the back and they'd be kind of pacing back and forth on the Senate floor. And it...
Well, you have an interesting perspective here because you know a thing or two about winning the Iowa caucuses. You won in 2016 there. This is the first big, real event when people are going to the voting booth. So it's going to set the tone for the rest of the primary.
They're dying not to be there.
Yeah.
After the trial ended last night, actually, Amy Klobuchar and I were visiting. She and I are friends. And she was... I don't want to pull an Elizabeth Warren and repeat things that were said to me in confidence or not said to me in confidence. I won't get into what Bernie and Elizabeth said to each other. But I think I can fairly say that Amy was chomping at the bit to run out and get on a plane and head back to Iowa. And she did tell me, we were talking about surrogates, and she did say she has a surrogate in Iowa who is, I think, a collegiate curling champion.
Curling, that's the one where it looks like people are mopping the
like
floor.
The broom in front of the rock. Look, I'm from Houston, so we don't have snow or ice. But it strikes me as a very Midwest thing to have the collegiate curling champion as apparently a surrogate.
That's a big deal. A really big deal that just came out of Iowa. There's a poll now that puts your colleague Bernie Sanders at the top of the pack there. Now, outside the margin of error, he's clearly in the lead right now.
I think that's right. And there's also a poll out of New Hampshire that has him in the lead there. And I think that has a lot of Democrats scared out of their mind. There are an awful lot of Democrats who I think if Bernie gets the nomination, it reelects Donald Trump, which is obviously not what Democrats are looking to do. it's interesting. 2 nights ago at dinner, when we were on the dinner break, several of us Republican senators were sitting there having dinner, and